Well, the world of Formula One is reeling from an extraordinary crash after Romain Grosjean's high-speed accident at the Bahrain Grand Prix.
The Frenchman's car was cut in two and exploded into a fireball after ploughing through a steel crash barrier on the opening lap of the race. Grodjean has since credited his miraculous escape to the halo head protection device, which was introduced into the sport 2 years ago. Let's have a quick look.
Hello everyone. Just wanted to say I am okay. Well, sort of okay. Thank you very much for all the messages. I mean, I wasn't for the halo some years ago, but I think it's the greatest thing that we've brought to Formula One, and without it I wouldn't be able to speak to you today. So thanks to all the medical staff at the circuit, at the hospital, and hopefully I can write you quite soon some messages and tell you where it's going.
Well, we're joined now by Formula One legend David Coulthard and FIA doctor, Dr. Ian Roberts, who arrived first at the scene of the crash in the medical car. Dr. Roberts, it must have been a very frightening moment.
Yes, it was indeed. Good morning. We arrived to see half a car and an inferno.
You can't.
So, yeah,
when you saw Grodjean come out of the car towards the barrier, I mean, you must have thought a miracle was happening.
Yes, when we arrived, you can see on the video there that there is a huge gap in the barrier, and in fact we could see Romain through that with flame all around, and he was struggling to get himself up and out. But it was a matter of how do we get to him? The extinguisher just pushed the flames back enough for us to get in and give him a hand for the last little bit out.
David Coulthard, this is, I imagine, every driver's worst nightmare. You have a massive crash and your car erupts into a fireball. When you first saw this, I mean, you were there, obviously, covering the Grand Prix. What was your first thought?
Yeah, well, it's so unusual now, Piers, to see fire in Formula One that, of course, your first thought is this is very, very serious. And the start of a Grand Prix, a Formula One car has 100 kilograms of fuel on board, so it's fat with fuel. And it was clear that the fuel cell had been ruptured. It wasn't clear at that point that the car was in two pieces and that Romain was partially through the barrier. But you know, I saw Ian yesterday at the racetrack, and you know, as we can't shake hands anymore, give him a fist bump. You know, he's the hero of the day. His selfless behaviour and getting in, directing the marshal, getting the flames back, and then reaching out for Romain is why, you know, Romain absolutely will make a full recovery, and in my mind is capable of racing before the end of the season.
And the other reason is this halo. Now, never has there been a more aptly named bit of kit. But David, the halo was controversial when it was introduced. The stats show that it improves survivability in bad crashes by about 17%, but many drivers were resistant. Tell us what the halo is, why there was controversy, and what the drivers will be thinking today.
Well, first of all, I would say that drivers through the history of time have always been reluctant for anything that gets in the way of their adrenaline rush of driving. You know, the late, great Sir Stirling Moss was against seatbelts when they were first introduced, and clearly now we can't imagine racing without seatbelts. But what happens, our governing body, the FIA, are there to protect the drivers and to be their conscience and to put things like halo in place. Now, a few years ago, sadly, we lost Jules Bianchi, the last driver to be killed through an accident in Formula One because his head, unprotected, struck a recovery vehicle. So the halo has been put in place to protect the driver's helmet against either a wheel strike, which is what killed Ayrton Senna back in '94, or in the case of Jules, a vehicle strike. And in this case, clearly, as Romain has gone through the Armco barrier, it's protected his head, which, you know, the definition of Formula One has always been an open cockpit car. If you put a roof on it, what you have is a sports car, and you go to Le Mans. So the halo is a step towards protecting us while still allowing the cockpit to be largely open.
Will this incident, do you think, David, have changed driver thoughts about the halo, or had it already been moving to general acceptance?
Every generation lives for their time. So I started in Formula One as the result of Ayrton Senna's death. So, you know, that was a tragic time. Roland Ratzenberger had been killed. Death was in the air. So everyone was very conscious of safety. And then over the passing of years, and decades, people become a little bit laissez-faire about things. And it was after the accident with Jules that, again, the drivers, they had their first time going to a funeral, laying to rest one of their own. This incident absolutely will focus the minds. Many of these drivers are just out of their teens. Some of them are still living at home with their parents. So,
Yeah.
they haven't really, had the experience of life of some of the older drivers. So this will be a wake up for people like Lewis, at 35, a 7-time world champion. This may well affect his future decisions. He hasn't signed a contract with Mercedes. One accident, of course, accidents can happen at any time, and sadly, people are being killed on the open roads every day. But this focuses the minds and can change the opinion of drivers going forward.
Well, Dr. Ian Roberts, I mean, as David Coulthard says, you've got the halo, but you've also got you, the hero, who was there within moments. Now, if this crash had happened later in the race, you might not have been able to get there quite so quickly. Is that the case?
Yes, I think so. We normally follow the first lap very closely in the medical car, and then we go to standby for the rest of the race. But in this instance, seconds really did count. But I would just echo David's comments on safety, the development of the halo, all of the other FIA safety things that have been put into the Formula One cars. It's all of these incremental things to hopefully make the driver a lot safer. But of course, it's a dangerous sport, and the safety message continues, and the work to improve safety.
One of the other things which has been, I suspect, hugely helpful here is the anti-inflammable kit that he was wearing, the clothing, protective clothing. Dr. Roberts, I mean, how much of a part has that played, do you think, in sparing this driver much worse burn injuries, for example?
Oh, I mean, enormously, and work goes on to improve the standards. I mean, in days gone by, the drivers would drive in a shirt and slacks, and obviously that was a long time ago. But the safety department is always pushing forward the quality and the specification for the safety equipment. You've
been with Grodjean in hospital. You know how injured he is. I mean, obviously, he was in a burning vehicle. Then, as we can see, there is this moment where he holds on to the crash barrier and clambers over it. So obviously he was exposed to that very hot metal as well. And we saw from his hospital bed that he's bandaged up over his hands. Don't know how the extent of the rest of his injuries, but it is remarkable that he survived at all. But what is the extent of the damage done to his hands and his feet?
Well, he does have burns to his hands. We'll be going to the hospital in about an hour's time, and hopefully the dressings will come down, and we'll actually see what the residual damage is, and take advice from the burn specialists on the way forward. He was treated sort of with various gels at the scene, and hopefully that has gone some way to reduce the injury, but we'll see a little bit later. Well,
brilliant work by you, Dr. Roberts. Finally, David Coulthard, just on a more happy note, even though that is actually an amazingly happy story that this guy survived this. I think we all agree on that. But Lewis Hamilton won again, 7 times world champion now. You and I had a lunch in the summer. We were debating who's the greatest of them all in racing. Is Lewis now number one? Is he the best of all time?
Yeah, well, I noticed you added the greatest of them all in racing. Otherwise, I think you explained to me you were the greatest of all during our lunch, Piers. But there's no question that every generation has their record breakers. And if you go through the history of sport, you can pull, whether it's Jackie Stewart, whether it's Jim Clark, whether it's Fangio, whether it's Senna, Schumacher, whoever. But I think that the thing that makes Lewis, for me, the greatest of all is the way he races. He's clean. He's fair. He has a conscience for his fellow racers, which I'm not sure that that Michael and Ayrton really had. They had a ruthlessness to the racing. So that's why Lewis is an exceptional racing driver.
And the question everyone asks is if they were all in the same car to the same spec, that's the criteria, isn't it? Who would win in a race-off? Do you think just from natural racing talent, Lewis would win? Because I've always edged in my head to Senna on the basis that actually it would be one of the guys that goes perhaps too far.
Well, I think then if they were in the same car, if Lewis was leading, because somebody has to lead the first corner, then I think neither the two drivers would finish, because I think Ayrton would crash into him. He did it with Prost, he did it with others. He wouldn't be able to accept he'd met his equal. So I think, look, it's always going to divide as to who's the greatest, you know, through your football statements as well. But I think, having worked with Ayrton, who was an exceptional character, I just think that the class of Lewis is something that really would mean that Ayrton would look him in the eye and shake his hand as his equal.
Amazing. David, great to talk to you. Dr. Roberts, thank you very much. Congratulations. You probably saved that guy's life, and I'm sure he's incredibly grateful to you, as everybody else is. So thank you both very much for joining us today.